Yeah, I think it was rather interesting looking at this. I mean, there have been articles in virtually every newspaper. Why would 731 parrots die? And of course, the sad thing I found is that, we normally jump on the guys that do all the poaching and the illegal transportation. And here is illegal transportation that went wrong. But let's talk to Dr. Steve Boyer. Steve, of course, also well known for the Cape parrot, Steve.
Yes, absolutely. I'm calling from Hogsback. We study them.
Yes, okay, right. We'll just stop the conversation there because I'll become jealous. It's an area I grew up in and really love desperately. Steve, but back to the World Parrot Trust. What on earth is the World Parrot Trust?
The World Parrot Trust is based out of the US and UK. We've established a footprint here in South Africa in the World Parrot Trust Africa. To specifically tackle issues related to the wild-caught bird trade. In 2006, the World Parrot Trust achieved that in Europe, and before that in 1992 in the US, and now we're looking at establishing that in Africa and in South Africa.
Everybody has had somebody in the family that has an African grey or the dusty grey parrot in a cage shouting out about Polly. There's obviously a love of humans for these animals, or is it a need to own them?
Look, I mean, the connection is quite primal that you can have with an African grey and any other parrot in a cage. African greys can form sentences up to 3 or 4 or 5 words. Some of these sentences make sense and have context in what they're doing. They are sentient beings, and we can pick that up, and that's not going to go away.
It doesn't go away, and yet we still see that people import vast quantities of these parrots. What happened in this occasion? What's happened is there are traders in South Africa that have seen an opportunity in the DRC. They've set up a pipeline to get parrots into South Africa by establishing a quarantine facility. Well, there's 2 of them now in Kinshasa, where they will hold at any one time up to 5,000 African greys, waiting for a South African vet to come and inspect them before they bring them into the country. Now, coming out of the DRC, they are exceeding their export quotas for African greys 4 or 5 times. And that is a clear and present extinction threat to the species in that country. We're already seeing local extinctions in some of the forests there. See, a lot of people are going to turn around and say, but hold on, I'm accepting a what would you call it, a traumatized or injured parrot, therefore I'm doing good, and they're going to die in the forest anyway because of destruction of the forest. Does that hold water?
No, it doesn't. Not at all. I mean, we need two things. We need a source population and a sink population. Now, the sink populations are usually on the edges of the forest where there's all of this disturbance happening. You often wonder, why are there still African grey parrots there? It's because in core areas, deep in the wilderness, there are areas where the African greys are doing very well, and those ones are emigrating out into those other areas. The places that the trappers go are to those core areas. They go deep into the forest where you only really find researchers and no one else. There's no national parks officials or government officials. And what they do is they do it so aggressively at drinking points that they will absolutely deplete that local population until there are no parrots there, then they'll move deeper into the forests. So it's a much deeper problem, and it's causing parrots to disappear from areas where they should be doing very, very well.
Some years ago, I was working with an organization, and we would come across these traders. They would bring in basically a king air load of parrots from, let's say, the DRC. And they worked on a principle of 20-25% of the parrots survived. They were quite happy. Is that what has happened in this occasion of moving them between 2 places? What went wrong in this occasion?
Look, these parrots were transported. It would take 2 or 3 days for them to get out of the forest into Kinshasa and into the quarantine. Now, this specific case we've been tracking for several months now. We actually managed to get the Congolese government to confiscate a shipment of over 800 African greys in the bush because the people catching them didn't have the correct permits. It was unfortunate that after a month, armed government officials arrived and seized those parrots back, put them back into the quarantine, and it's quite likely that among the parrots that died on the one-time flight,
were those Congo 500, the ones that we had managed to confiscate.
Yeah, when we say they died on the fly, I mean, this is an internal South African flight. I can't get any comment from one time, and it doesn't appear anybody can either. But surely there shouldn't have been any deaths involved if we think that animals, your pet goes into the same hold. It's the live hold, surely.
It is. It's cargo one. I mean, the same air is circulated into the passenger hold. The engineers at one time and Express Air Services say that the system was completely functional, the air was circulating properly. In addition, there was a puppy with the African Greys, which was completely unharmed, as well as the fact that there were 2 African Greys that were also unharmed by this. It's hard for us to understand how this happened. I mean, there are canaries in the coal mine, and we do that for a reason, in the sense that birds are a lot more sensitive. But I find it hard to believe. There's several answers or questions that need to be answered.
Are they going to do autopsies on this, or is this very much around the line of let's just wash it under the table?
From the 3rd of Jan, when we discovered this, I started speaking to the vet in Durban who represents the state vet, and he described a horror scene of birds with blood coming out of their eyes, and he autopsied the lungs, and they were grey and collapsed. We then could not get the official report out of Pretoria, and they were quite worried too. That vet then went overseas. So there's been those issues. We've been struggling to get information. It just seems that the official report that's come out now states that it probably was carbon monoxide poisoning. And in my mind, that's impossible. The birds may have suffocated or frozen, but they would have had to be in very poor condition to die from that en masse.
Steve, can I ask you a question? Is it legal to transport such a huge number of birds in one go? Is this done often? Do we transport generally 700 and something, 800, 900 birds to different countries via airplane?
Yes, it does happen quite often, and it's not allowed. I mean, the most that you could possibly put into crates those size was 25 birds, and in this case there were 46 to 48 birds, African Grey Parrots, in each of the cages.
And who's responsible for that, Steve, for having made that decision and packed so many birds in the cage? Is that the airline, or is the people who are getting them transported?
When the birds were loaded, the owner of the birds was there, the state vet was there, the quarantine master was there, as well as staff from Express Air Services. All of them agreed that the birds were going to be fine. They've obviously done this many, many times, which is something we're trying to stop from happening. One time, in Express Air Services have agreed to set limits on the number of birds that they transport. In the region of if more than 4 birds are going to be transported, the regional manager needs to be there. If more than 25 birds, which is the limit for those crates, they'll have to contact myself at the World Parrot Trust.
Okay. It's going to be very interesting because, of course, if we do look at day-old chicks, if you can go into the airport at any time, if you go to the cargo section, there are tons of day-old chicks that are moved in aircraft, and there are little chick boxes all over the place. So it does sound like something seriously wrong. Steve, as you leave us, though, what do we do when we walk into the pet shop and we see that lovely African grey parrot in the corner?
Talking up a storm.
At the moment, I would say we leave that bird alone, in the sense that most of the birds coming in are going into breeding facilities in South Africa, where the African Greys are treated very much like battery chickens. The eggs are removed, they are incubated and hand-raised, and then sent to pet stores as captive bred. And the pet store, and it tells you it's captive bred, it is captive bred. It's just the problem is that the parents are often going to only survive for 3 to 5 years before their resources are depleted and they are discarded and then replaced by more wild-caught birds. Alternatively, that's a wild-caught bird sitting there, but you can pretty much see that when you're interacting with it. It's distinctly wilder than a hand-raised bird.
Well, Steve, on that one, thank you very much. As you leave us, any website that people can look at?
I would say go to our Facebook group, the Cape Parrot Project. We disseminate a lot of our information through that.
Okay. Steve, enjoy the Hogsback and the Cape Parrots. You guys are doing an interesting and very good job.
Thanks so much. We're coming into a very important time now. We're going to do some more disease testing and find out whether that outbreak is an extinction threat to the species.
Wonderful, and we'll chat to you about that on a separate occasion.
Thanks so much.
Cheers now, and that's Dr. Steve Boyes. And as you can hear, the man is passionate about his parrots, doing an awful lot of work with the Cape Parrots in South Africa, and very, very important.
And after this, we're going to take a quick break here. After that, we'll talk to Director of BirdLife South Africa, Mark Anderson.
You've tried notice boards.
Okay, it's 18 minutes past 6. It's your time to focus on conservation, wildlife, the environment. We're spending the first hour talking about birds. That was the African Grey Parrots, 731 of which, were died last week on that flight between Cape Town and, Joburg and Durban. And what we're basically saying, and what Dr. Steve Boys was basically saying, is do not buy African Greys. I wonder if Mark Anderson, CEO for BirdLife South Africa, would agree with that. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Q.
Morning, Mark.
How's it, Tim?
I am, and yourself?
I'm very well. It's very wet here in the Northern Cape. It's incredible.
Well,
it's raining for the last 12 hours non-stop.
Join the crowd, Mark. We've been having that since the 7th of December. Mark, you heard about this parrot fiasco, didn't you?
Absolute disaster.
Wasn't it? And nobody's responsible. Nobody's claiming responsibility for it. This is what I find just absolutely amazing, huh?
Yes, let's hope there's investigations underway and they can get to the bottom of it.
Well, I'd like to make sure that one of those parrots goes to Emily up in Pretoria, who's the pathologist, because she is good and she is not attached to anybody, and consequently you get a genuine answer.
That's right, yes.